advocacy for inclusive design in spaces, products, and services. You can learn more about us. I don't want to dwell so much on the introduction. You can learn more about us by visiting our website, udiafrica.org. Please, next slide. So about this event, about this stakeholders event, now the idea behind this series is to have an advocacy and education effort, designed to ignite thoughts on how to promote the practice of inclusive design and universal design in Nigeria and in Africa. And so that is why we're having this series of conversation. And this particular session we're currently on is focusing on the role of designers. There are a lot of stakeholders involved when we talk about inclusion, when we talk about how people living with disabilities can be properly included in society. There are a lot of stakeholders involved. But for this particular session, we're focusing on the role of designers. And by designers, we're talking about architects, we're talking about interior designers, we're talking about landscape architects, students, practitioners, professionals, everyone within the design field. And our vision for this stakeholder series is to continue to have conversations, including with policymakers, with those in the educational sector. I believe you probably heard or encountered the term inclusive education, the private sector, with real estate developers, with other design and construction stakeholders, and so on, design students, professional bodies, statutory planning agencies, to mention but a few. And so we're going to look at what we'll be focusing on today, our agenda. I believe you all received that in the email. Today on this program, we have two highly skilled and well-experienced persons who will be speaking to us on different topics around the role of designers. First of all, we have Ahmed El-Rida, who is a member of the International Union of Architects Accessibility for All Working Group. And Ahmed will be speaking to us today on how to bridge economic, physical, and social gaps through design. I believe that is some interesting subject that you want to learn more about. And also we have today the Executive Director of the Institute for Human-Centered Design, Valerie Fletcher, who will be speaking on designing environments for all. There will also be a Q&A session, and we will close. So just a few housekeeping rules. Please mute your microphones when you're not speaking. Send your questions in the chat box and raise your hands virtually, of course, if you have a question or if you want to speak. Of course, like I said earlier, you can send your questions in the chat box, but if you want to ask a question, you can also raise your hand when the time Q&A comes, and you'll be allowed to ask your questions. So I'm going to do a very brief introduction of our facilitators. These are very interesting people and very amazing people too. And as a team in UDIA, we're very privileged to have them on this event. So Ahmed, like I mentioned earlier, is a member of the International Union of Architects, Architecture for All Working Group, and he currently works with the CPABE, which is a certification program of the International Accessibility Practitioners Association. And he's a subject matter expert and is a member of the task force to streamline this certification process for the CPAB means Certified Professional in Accessible Built Environments. Ahmed is also an architect from Libya, so he's based in Libya, and he has been working for over 30 years as a universal access consultant. So you see, I mean, he has so much experience, and that is what we want to glean from this afternoon. Also, we have Valerie Fletcher, who has been the Executive Director of the Institute for Human-Centered Design in Boston since 1998. And Valerie writes, lectures, and works internationally. And she currently oversees a couple of projects ranging from the development of a new national website on accessibility and inclusive design in cultural facilities for national endowments to, she has also created the IHCD user/expert lab, which has over 300 people engaged in the evaluation of places, products, and services to determine how accessible or how inclusive the design is. Her research process is integrated social and environmentally sustainable solutions for multi-family housing, healthcare, culture, workplaces, and the public realm. So to start out this afternoon, we're going to have Ahmed take us on designing environments bridging economic, physical, and social gaps through design, while Valerie will be speaking later on after Ahmed on designing environments for all. Please, let's welcome Ahmed. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Ladies and gentlemen, you hear me well? You hear me?
Yes,
Yes,
yes, we can hear you.
Right. So, my name is Ahmed El-Rida, and I am speaking to you from Libya, in Benghazi. At the beginning of this session, I'd like to say thank you so much for Mr. Okom Obong, who has invited me to take part in this important event. I am very happy also to be with you all and also to be with Valerie Fletcher, a well-known expert on universal design. It is an honor to share with you all, and today we are talking about a very important topic. Especially in Africa, we really need it. Architecture for All working program in International Union of Architects is moving forward since years, but still very weak in Africa reality. To give members of Architecture for All of International Union of Architects, to give members ability to learn more about these issues of accessibility and universal design. So that's why the reason of Architecture for All working program. My daily job really is to try help in promoting accessibility and universal design in my country and abroad. It's always very helpful to be open to a different practices and experiences. So today I will be presenting and discussing with you what's the effect of design, the economic, physical, and social from the accessibility and universal design point of view. Accessibility and universal design point of view is very related to the issues of social and economy, of course. Since the organizer chose the role of design in inclusion as the title of this event, they did better with this choice because the title indicates directly what we want to reach out. Why it's very important for every architect and also building designer to be aware of his role in achieving inclusiveness. As you see in the slides, how it's developed from exclusion, segregation, integration, and today we are talking about the approach of inclusion. The level of inclusiveness vary from country to country, from region to region, and that's depend the culture, economical, mental issues. Inclusiveness remain as a main tool to measure the quality of living in each society. We are in Africa, in most of our country and in many other countries in the world, there is exclusion, segregation, discrimination, and forms of exclusion and segregation. The rapid change in the global concept has gone beyond the concept of integration, and now it's to inspire inclusion. This is a brief historical background how the design developed in the last 40 years. Typically, we are designing for the standard, normal, standard, average scale person. Since many years ago, this method is added barrier-free design. That means to consider people with disability within the design through the design for the average scale person. Today, we are talking about universal design, which everybody should be included. This is a fact that Da Vinci scale or Le Corbusier scale is start lose his effect in the education and practice. And we are talking more about understanding diversity before applying a standard. And also due to that, a lot of international standards have to be changed. We see many international strategies have raised requirement that the standard for persons, for average standard person, will not or cannot fulfill it. It will not work anymore. If we take, for examples, these kind of strategies since 2002 until 2016. For example, Madrid International Plan of Action of Aging, it's talk about ensuring enabling and support environment, which is standard for average person will not work for this. We are also talk about the Convention on the Right of Person with Disability, which also focus on enable person with disability to live independently and to participate fully in all aspects of life. And without accessibility, of course, people with disability cannot take part in a society. Even in the Sustainable Development Goals, due to the 17 columns of these Sustainable Development Goals, you will find that we should make cities and human settlement inclusive, safe, and relevant, and sustainable. And that means it should be designed for everyone. Lastly, new urban agenda to adopt accessibility and universal design as a core principle into national, subnational, and local action plans for implementation of the new urban agenda. Due to all that, we see that design for average scale person will not work for the social development and for the economical development. Because the traditional question says that how much it will cost me if I want my environment or my building to be accessible and designed. And I can suggest that we can change this question, how much we will lose if our environment will be not accessible. At the International Union of Architects, we have a architecture for all working program. This working program is working for raise awareness for the architect's responsibility to ensure that accessibility and inclusive design are essential component of architectural design, construction, and education as well. The program promotes good practice and accessible and inclusive urban design and architects. This is a good opportunity to invite every architect in Africa to be part of these activities and to promote universal design through his practice, through his work in company, or in his education and the training activities. We also invite you to go through the very important document published last year. It's International Union of Architects Guidelines on Accessible and Inclusive Built Environment, which you'll find that it shows the responsibility of the new generation architects. What's our responsibility today? We are playing the main role of changing this. I think I remember since some years ago, the theme of the International Day of Architects was the architects are the main changers of the world. So it comes that we have to think about or rethink architecture. It's not, the building is not only a piece of art, it's a space for living. If you consider that living for everyone, so we have to include everyone, and that means we have to consider another way of thinking and focus on the principle of universal design and accessibility standards. Universal design or universal accessibility is not only based on building regulation, but it's related more about the information of the end users. It not only include people with disability, elderly people, but also include some situation we live with daily in our lifespan. Is not considered enough in our design, started from the master plan of the city until the detail of the interior design. So the universal design is a response to lifestyle, because usually says in some minds or some thoughts here that it's something related to advanced country, or it's related to Scandinavian countries. It's not for our local architecture. No, that's not true. The universal design is not really touch the culture. It's only use the culture to develop the culture, and the symbol of architect will remain, but the principle is changing. The consideration, the touch up, the spaces, the sounds, the colors. So that's the main issues that influence the design to include everyone. I would like to give you some small examples from Libya about how we can change. This project, I take it 10 years ago. It's a building, it was not completed. It's on hold for about 20 years, it's not completed. And the government is decided to complete it. And that was the situation of the building when we take the responsibility of completion and redesign it. And you see the example, it's a good example of barriers. It's full of barriers. And usually architects or even decision makers think that accessibility is something for the future project. It's not for the existing environment. And that also is not true, because that's a loss socially and economy. It's really loss. So if we think from the early beginning, even when we want to upgrade the existing environment during the maintenance or during the completion, so a lot of things can be done from the accessibility point of view. Because usually during my experience, when we come to the decision maker, so what about the accessibility? Okay, X project is already done. The design is approved. Nothing can be done. Let's think it about the let us think about that in the new project. And that is really not good, because in this case we will lose a lot of chances and opportunity. This is the example how the building is changing. It's only a kind of discussion between the contractor and the owner. What about making the project better? That was the title of discussion. And at the end, we raise up the level of accessibility. We come with a lot of solutions within the barriers and obstacles in the building. And how that's the final look, how the building is looking. And today this building is used in Benghazi, used in many events, and it's enabled elderly people, people with disability, to come in and to share the society. And after that, when they are coming here, they start establish associations, they are start open markets, and they start open businesses. And that's how the design can enhance the social integration and the economy as well. That's how it's looking at the end, some elements of some example elements of the building, and how it's respond to the diversity, different types of ability and situation that users are passed through. Today, this year's International Year of Disabled talk about the theme of this year is talk about building path better toward disability inclusion, accessibility and sustainable post-COVID-19 world. This is a very important theme. It was very clever to choose this theme to be the theme of this year. There is a lot of overlapping between the method of applying universal design and the new requirement of COVID. I tried, because Okom is talking to me very late about this, and I try to give some slides shows that how it's come. If you see these pictures, you can see that it's talk about universal design, ability, strengths the ability of using a building. At the same time, it talk about consideration for COVID-19. Another example, think, if you see we are in the universal design, we don't ask the builders to use the sink at the left side of the screen. It cannot be operated for many part of user, a big portion of users. But the sink at the right hand is flexible. It can be used by quadriplegia, by people who have problems, temporary problem in their hands, or by when your hand is still dirty or something like that. And also it's a tool for consideration of COVID-19. For example, the light switch. At the right side is the universal light switch, which should fit with many powers. One of the principles of universal design says low effort in use. We should use a very low effort when we're using building, environment, and facilities. And it's also a kind of consideration. I can operate it by the back of my hand, so I can protect my face. And that is another issue where you can find overlapping between universal design and COVID-19. It's also when you see another examples, building materials. There is a lot of examples where you see that the universal design is meet and respond somehow, or the approach it responds about the diversity, and among the diversity is the case of the COVID-19. Lastly, when we speak about the space we need to enable people who are deaf to talk to each other by sign language, so they need a space when they are moving. Also, a wheelchair user, when they are using the walkways, when they are meeting with other walkways, pedestrians, so they need a wider space. People who are using electrical wheelchair, so they need more space. And it's as the same we need it today for COVID-19. Space, we need distance between each others. And I will invite you also to see this movie. I can send it to Icom later on, and he can share it with you. This screenshot come from a very important movie. Let's talk about consideration of a space for the sign language of a deaf. And it's really completely works with the COVID-19. Thank you very much for this opportunity. And I'd like to say again, thank you for the African Initiative for Universal Design, and hopefully it will work to create a better understanding of the issue of integration and universal design. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ahmed. Thank you so much for that very interesting presentation. So next, we're going to have Valerie present on designing environments for all. Thank you, Valerie.
Thank you. Can I share my screen? Yes. Good afternoon. I'm so pleased to be here. I have become very committed to Ecom and Confidence and UDIA. I believe that they are at the early stages of a transformational NGO. And I will do everything in my power to facilitate their success over time, but I have great confidence. I also am delighted to follow Ahmed, partly because Ahmed spoke of a number of things that I think are really big ideas that we want to keep in mind today. One, this notion of architecture is about creating a world for people. One of my favorite phrases in the United States is from a professor of architecture at the University of California at Berkeley, Ray Lifshay, who refers to architecture as a social art. And I think that's what we need to always emphasize. It is not sculpture. It is a social art. It does not exist without the user. And the other point that Ahmed made that I'd like to just affirm in its importance is we mustn't forget existing conditions. This is not just about new construction. This has been a challenging issue across the globe, and it simply fails if you aren't looking at the existing environment. So thanks very much for including me in today's event. I'm going to move quickly through probably too many slides, but I will make this available as a PDF if anybody is interested in getting a second bite at it. So let me just quickly begin a little bit on who we are. So we are called the Institute for Human-Centered Design. We were originally called Adaptive Environments, and we were parties to the development of the Principles of Universal Design in 1997. And we were the hosts, the primary hosts of the first international conference on universal design in New York in 1998. But we are an educational and design NGO dedicated to enhancing the experience of everybody, but certainly thinking about ages, ability, and cultures. And let me be very clear that cultures is something that we take very seriously. It's really race and culture, especially here in the United States. This is a big priority for us now. And we are an unusual nonprofit in that we do a variety of things that interrelate to one another. And we essentially earn our annual budget. So it's education and training, which we do internationally. We do consulting, and we do design services. So it's pretty varied. Our research, and again, Ahmed mentioned, we must engage people directly. We do extensive contextual inquiry work with what we call user experts, people with lived experience of a functional limitation. And we have over 500 people in Boston. The COVID impact this year has been very difficult in doing that work. We believe that the most important thing that you can do is to really ask yourself, who are you designing for? I realize, particularly for architects, you're designing for the client, but we would urge you to really think about the end user, respond to the demographics of the population. And as Ahmed mentioned, the aging of the world's population has been a very significant catalyst for inclusive design. And you can see from this chart that this is a global phenomenon that doesn't vary very much between the developed nations, which are in orange. They are a much smaller number of the world's population, and the turquoise or blue part of these graphs. And this is a story that's been going on since 1950, and a very important catalyst, especially for nations that have a very high proportion of people who are over 55 or 60 now. And I want to acknowledge that in Nigeria, we are looking at one of the youngest nations on earth. The phenomenon of an aging population is still in the future for Nigeria. If you look at the chart on the left, you can see how tiny it is and how small it gets even after age 55 to 59. It is important to make note that the Nigerian lifespan is one of the shortest in the world. And we surely hope that part of what will happen in the coming decades is that Nigeria's reality will change, and it will no longer be likely that people will die at such a young age. This is what our same chart looks like in the United States. You can see how different it is and how many people there are at 65 to 69, 70 to 74, right up to 100, where there are, the fastest growing population in America is over 85 years old. So it's important to just acknowledge where we are different in our starting places. Disability is the other catalyst for universal inclusive design globally. And I think everybody knows that this is 1 in 7 people on the planet have a disability. 80% live in the majority world. Of course, I believe this is an undercount. Many nations do not count people with brain-based conditions at all, which is inevitably going to result in an undercount. I also want to make note that Nigeria and much of Africa is in a very different place, not just on aging, but also on issues of disability. So polio has now been controlled in Nigeria, but it is fairly recent. If you look at the number of cases just since 2000, the eradication of polio is a very recent story. And polio globally was a very significant catalyst for the original accessibility standards because it was a global epidemic. And it resulted in orthopedic impairment. So it's important to acknowledge that Nigeria and much of Africa has a much higher rate of orthopedic impairment, quite different from where the US and many of the developed nations are now, and more like where we were 40 years ago. So today, no native-born American under 68 has had polio. We have had an eradication that long. So it's a very big contrast. And I want to just be respectful that we start from other places. I want to also share, a place like the United States that has had, depending on how you count, really significant legislation requiring accessibility and quite good demographic data on disability. We now use this is from our Centers for Disease Control, 26% of adults in America have some type of disability, and it falls differently on different populations. So the older population is 40%, Black Americans are 25%, Native Americans are 40%. So it's, people who are inequitable or live in an inequitable situation in the United States have higher rates of disability. It is also something I want to share with you that this is fresh this year on the 30th anniversary of the passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act. Mobility issues are still #1 in reasons for disability. However, it is not wheelchair use. Wheelchair use is not a big story. It is only 1.4 Americans outside of nursing homes who use wheeled mobility. But the growth of mobility limitations has largely been related to chronic health conditions and aging. And note, please, that the second most common reason for disability among adults is cognition. We refer to it as brain-based conditions to capture the whole breadth of reasons why the mental aspects of disability are so significant. But it is rising exponentially, and it is the largest reason for disability among children and young people in America. Data is poor. Globally, data is terrible. So this was a big priority of the CRPD, the Convention on the Human Rights of People with Disabilities. There's also in the World Health Organization Disability Action Plan. We aren't able to compare across nations very accurately because we don't count the same way, we don't count the same things. And in many cases, we simply don't count a lot of people. I have to tell you that my nation is also far from perfect in counting, because I've just spent much of this last year looking at the changing reality of disability in America. And I have to tell you, among the people with disabilities in the highest proportions are people who are homeless and people who are in our correctional system. And we do count. However you count, I would urge you to be thinking about 3 kinds of human functional limitation: physical, sensory, and on the sensory side, let me remind you that sight limitations, for example, include people who are literally blind, but the overwhelming population of people with legal blindness or sight limitations have low vision. Very important for designers. They use what sight they have, even if it isn't very good. And on the hearing side, only 0.23% of Americans are culturally deaf and use sign language. And that varies a little bit from nation to nation. It's a very important population, but the majority of hearing loss are people with acquired hearing loss, and they hear something. Again, thinking about design of being cognizant on the sensory side of how diverse their needs are. And on the brain-based side, just an enormous issue that I think a great deal of research needs to be done. Let me also note that rates of brain-based disabilities always rises as economies shift to being knowledge-based. Knowledge-based economies, of course, are dependent on their population to be able to function in a knowledge economy. And that means that we pay much more attention. There's no longer a way to shuffle people off and not participate in a knowledge economy. Accessibility standards and codes are a floor, a baseline for universal design, and those vary across the world. So In the United States, we've had a very clear set of priorities from the get-go. And this is the 30th anniversary of the passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act, probably the most robust national legislation. And it was the first time that design was identified as a civil and a human right. And I strongly urge you to really incorporate that idea of design as a human right. It is very different from thinking that this is about building codes. This is really about justice. The quest for inclusion has got to be framed in terms of rights and responsibilities. If a load of people over here have rights and nobody has responsibilities and they aren't held to them, you're in big trouble. So that's probably the best thing the United States has done on this front, is really be very clear of who's responsible. Among those responsible parties are architects whose license makes them the responsible party for the built environment. And there's no equity without a commitment to reasonable accommodation. There just has to be a commitment that you must take action. And just a reminder, and I'm very interested in looking up the guidance that Ahmed shared. This is what we are working with in most of the world, the International Organization for Standardization, the ISO, and the Building Construction, Accessibility and Usability in the Built Environment Guide. And this is the draft version from February of this year. And then on to universal design. We at IHCD have begun to use the term inclusive design more commonly, partly because of the tension around inequity in our culture, our society. But we were obviously at the table from the very beginning. Our first book on universal design was published in '95. But it's a framework for thinking. It's about humanity-centered design of everything with everyone in mind. And those principles, boy, they're pretty old at this point, but they are still really practical and really usable. And we're going to illustrate those a little bit in a few minutes. But they are common principles of good design. There's nothing unusual about them. It's how we interpret them by thinking to the broadest spectrum of people that we are designing for. Global policy on equity and inclusion, and Ahmed had a slide that noted this. We at IHCD are very much focused on the World Health Organization. Partly, this international classification of function, disability, and health is not, you don't need to remember that so much, but you do need to remember that this global policy issued in 2001 is the global gold standard of how we think about disability. And they differentiate between functioning and disability. Disability in this case is the negative byproduct of the intersection with the environment. But here's what's important. Functional limitation is a universal human experience if you live a typical lifespan. I don't know if that's true in Nigeria, quite honestly, when the lifespan is so short. I will promise you, in the United States, where the lifespan is an average of 82 and 83, you're going to experience functional limitation somewhere along the line, probably at least in the last decade. They managed to get mental and physical reasons for limitations equalized, parity between those two things, which was a massive undertaking and objected to by many nations. But that is where it landed. And that is a really precious asset of the World Health Organization. This is what's important for designers. The notion that disability, in this case, the negative byproduct of a person with a functional limitation and the environment, it's contextual. We can change it. Those of us who create environments can minimize the negative aspects of a functional limitation. It's an extraordinary invitation to play, to make a difference. And they were smart enough, even 19 years ago, to recognize that the context was not limited to the physical context, but also to the communication, the information, the policy environment, and the all-important attitudinal environment. That if you can't get people to change how they think, if they can't have that aha moment, you will always be compromised in what you can do. Back then, to our complete shock, so the principles of universal design had just been codified 4 years before. There was no communication with anybody who was, centrally involved in that. And the World Health Organization recommends universal design as the most promising framework for identifying the facilitators that would go beyond barrier removal. They were very clear that barrier removal was a focus of accessibility and very legitimate, but it was not enough. that you were looking not just to minimize the negative effects of disability, but to enhance participation and experience. And the Convention on the Human Rights of People with Disabilities, we were very involved in the development, spent a great deal of time in New York over the 4.5 years of the development. And I think it remains a very important international policy. It allows one to have conversations with people across the globe. And you can see that most of the world has signed on. 182 nations have ratified this treaty. 164 nations have signed. I am sorry that my country has not ratified, and that is about politics, but it's a source of real frustration. But you can see Africa is very important in this story, and I have to tell you, even in those earliest years in the development of the CRPD, the African contingent in New York at the UN was amazing. There were so many people there, and it was 2 meetings a year. It was 2 weeks at a time, and the African nations made an extraordinary commitment. For good reason. It is assumed that there are 300 million people in Africa with disabilities. It's the highest rate of disability in the world, even if it isn't counted, in that way at the nation level. And Africa knew it. The African Decade for Disability, 1999 to 2009, and then they do it again, 2010 to 2019. Extraordinary. And the ratification and the signatories are very impressive from Africa. They were the first out of the gates, and you should be very proud of that, even if follow-on hasn't always been what you would want. I wouldn't want to talk to a group of designers without sharing some images, some illustrations of what this looks like. So equitable use, the first principle. And this is a city in the world, one of the world's great cities in my book, Sao Paulo, Brazil. And Brazil, this is some years ago. Politics always interferes, my friends. I wish I could tell you that once things are moving in the right direction, they are secure. That is not always true. But this is a city of over 12 million, and had almost nothing at the start of their commitment to really universal design. But they were just beginning on accessibility, and they did extraordinary things. And they focused on their very, very big streetscape. They made their main avenue, Avenue Paulista, into a model of universal design. It was phenomenal. The curb cut challenge was a big challenge for them. And, they were brilliant. They were so creative. They created a company in Sao Paulo that made prefabricated curb cuts. So they could put in 600,000 curb cuts. Phenomenal. Another place that has been very impressive in their adoption of the CRPD, even though they have a tremendous distance to go, is Mexico, and Mexico City in particular. And Mexico City is one of the great examples of the power of public transit. So in less than 10 years, they became the 6th busiest inclusive bus rapid transit system in the world. 300 million passengers a year on 6 lines. I've ridden these things. This is a great system in a difficult city, but it has changed the lives of people with disabilities. This is just a small example of one that, we were consultants on this project. It's a children's museum. And this is essentially a treehouse. And this was very deliberately designed to be inclusive of all children. And in the United States, where children are more likely to have brain-based conditions, it was not about physical or sensory issues overwhelmingly. It was really thinking about what that diversity of brain-based conditions in children need and want. And part of that was creating choice. And some of that was places to pull away from other children. So it was a marvelous experience to work with an interesting group. Flexible. Design accommodates a wide range of individuals with different preferences and abilities. This is a favorite designer of mine, Yoshisuke Miyake. He is actually based in Japan, but he's done a lot of work around the world. This is Tau Pau Sensory Garden. It is in the heart of Singapore. If any of you have ever been to Singapore, it's an intense urban place. They took over a parking lot for one of those giant public housing projects they call estates, and transformed it into a sensory garden designed for the lifespan. So there's things for little kids and big kids and older people. It's a terrific testament to what's possible in an unpromising environment. This is just a small example from something that we're trying to figure out in cities across America now, where there is not enough affordable housing and certainly not enough accessible housing or inclusive housing, and finding little pieces of land where you can do an accessory dwelling unit behind, next to, in front of an existing home. Simple and intuitive use. This is just it's a fancy example of a simple idea that can be replicated. And this is the Getty Museum in Los Angeles. And their map for the campus is three-dimensional. And it represents the proportion, the sizes exactly of the buildings on the campus. People remember things when they learn them in at least two senses. If you can touch and smell, if you can see and hear. And in this case, you're looking and touching, and you remember, I'm looking for the square building next to the tall building. This is a close colleague of mine. She is the toilet queen of Japan. And I've always loved the quote, a society that gives toilets their dues, a society that values life. This is a tough slog anywhere in the world. And she actually did a presentation for us 2 weeks ago and really told a story about how Japan was nowhere in the 80s. The beginning of the 80s, Japan had the filthiest toilets you could imagine, and no place anybody wanted to spend any time. They made a decision that in a very crowded society, toilet rooms, public toilet rooms, were a place of refuge and a place to sort of pull yourself together. Anyway, they've done it at a degree that no one could have imagined. Perceptible information. Oops, sorry, a duplicate there. We do a tremendous amount of work in museums, and we do that work partly because museums are often places where people want to raise the bar. They want to try new things. We've actually just we've seen the opening of a museum we worked on in the Olympic and Paralympic Museum here in Colorado. This is a historic museum. Many of you may get the chance to be here one day or have been there. The National Museum, the Natural History Museum in London. And they just pulled 20 of the treasures out of their collection and created a treasures gallery. But it is a multi-sensory, extraordinary experience of richness, of how well this works for anybody. Tolerance for error, this is seldom clear in accessibility. It's very important in inclusive design. And stairs are one of the most dangerous parts of the environment. They also are often beloved of architecture. This is the Metropolitan Museum in New York. If you exit the Metropolitan Museum and it closes at night in some times of the year, you're blinded by the sun, which is right out that door. And people fell all the time, cost them a fortune, and they added lights below the railings. The other is really designed, it's purpose-built for people who are blind and low vision, and you can see a subtle change on these stairs. There's a stair nosing. It's shiny on the first step and on the last step on each run, and matte in between. Just a smart, savvy choice. Low physical effort, we know that as a familiar concept from accessibility. This is one of our projects at the Boston Architectural College. This is an historic building originally built as a police station. Then it was the Institute of Contemporary Art, and they destroyed most of the historic features of the building. The Boston Architectural College bought it, and we renovated it and really restored some of the historic features. This was a universal green and historic preservation project and great fun. So instead of having clunky stairs that you climb, it's a seamless entry with automatic doors that are level. Size and space for approach and use. This is a project I'm very excited about. Anna Heringer is a German architect, and she did some remarkable things here. This was a collaborative participatory project with people in Bangladesh, with a NGO in Bangladesh that provides services to people with disabilities. And this was actually built partly with the labor of people with disabilities. It was constructed in that way. We're actually doing a session next week with her, and I'm happy to say Ecom is going to be part of a panel following that discussion. Last thoughts. Who are you designing for? I realize how easy it is to I'm designing for the client who's paying the bill. You are an educator of that client. what works for people at the edges of the spectrum to deliver better experiences for everyone. You've got to be able to make that argument that it isn't special. It isn't, you know, that it's going to somehow diminish the experience of other people. And this critically important gift from the World Health Organizations, architects and designers create the context for people's lives. And you have tremendous power to transform participation and well-being for an enormous part of the population. And the International Day of People with Disabilities is tomorrow. and I'm with Ahmed. I'm thrilled that Building Back Better is the tagline for this important event. And it is also the tagline for our new president who starts next month. So thank you very much for your attention.
Wow, this is thank you very much, Valerie. Thank you for an awesome presentation. Thank you, Ahmed. Um, we're so excited to have wonderful resource persons, you know, speak to us. And right now we'll be going to our question and answer session. I think I saw a couple of questions from Phil Chambers. Yeah, I saw a question from Phil Chambers. And he says, "Hi, Valerie. You people use people with disability in the UK. We use disabled people." So he's finding out what your thoughts are, you know, on that.
Not my biggest worry right now, and nice to see that you're here, Phil. Very nice to see you. My biggest worry about this is that the reality is that the majority of disabilities are not apparent. And it is not an obligation to self-identify and embrace an identity as a person with a disability or a disabled person. And I worry about our focus on some of the language when I know in the work that we're doing here in the United States that a great many people never self-identify as a person with a disability, never acknowledge or even know that they have rights as a person with a disability or a disabled person. So I'm more worried about the people who aren't aware that what they may see as a health condition is actually, you know, appropriately considered a disability, and that they have rights, and we have a need to pay attention to that large population of people who don't identify that way. It is particularly true in the United States of older people with acquired conditions, and it is pervasive among Black and Brown Americans. I don't know if that answers your question.
All right. Okay, I want to ask Ahmed. This is a personal question. How do you advise a client, you know, who already has an existing structure and a business that's running for him or her? You know, how do you advise that kind of person to make adjustments, make necessary adjustments? You know, as it pertains to universal design. How do you advise that person when he has all the economic value, he thinks he has all the money, he's making all the money in his business? How do you advise that person?
Thank you, Com, for this nice question, good question. From my point of view, it's a matter of awareness. I mean, the people in general, not only in Nigeria or in Libya, they don't realize yet that design for all or universal design is the business of tomorrow. It really is the business of tomorrow. They don't realize, even the architects themselves, that the marketability of the school or hotel or whatever will be raised up. It will invite wider customer. And besides that, it will meet with the new standards as the drafts that shows by Valerie. It's the new version, which is the first one is adopted in 2011, accessibility and usability of built environment. So to be sure that my hotel today will meet this standard, which is still published, this means a lot. But I mean, the majority of the customer, for example, here in Libya, they have negative thoughts about that. they think that when they are applying accessibility, they will have a hospital-looking hotel or a hospital. Yeah, I mean that's the idea. So I think we need a lot of effort, like this event, for example. A lot of we have to work in education, also in training of architect, and engage the principle of universal design approach in the education of the new generation. And coming back to the customers, to the owner, you mean, of the properties, I think we have to run some events with the people who work in the area of economic and development, and to show the how these issues can enhance the economy, can have raise up the income or increase the loss. I think there is a lot, you can do it in a different way, is my opinion.
Okay. Okay. Valerie, please. Thank you.
One of the things that maybe I'm too optimistic, but I actually think that we also have to be thinking about advantages that we can derive from the global pandemic. And I think that everyone is thinking more about the way in which our built environment contributes to our health and well-being. And I think that that is a really important part of the message going forward, that this is intrinsic to places that support health and well-being. So I think that's part of the message. It's part of what I think is the pitch to clients.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. I mean, for we in Africa, I think this is very helpful because considering the fact that many of our buildings have already been erected without the principles of universal design in mind, and it takes a lot of convincing to get clients to buy into the idea. I hope that this would help somebody. I hope that this would help a designer, and it's good to know that when we design for the weakest people or the weakest of users, we're designing for everybody. And I took a quote from Judy Human sometime, and he said everybody would get disabled at some point in their lives. They just never know when. I'm paraphrasing. I've forgotten kind of the quote. Yeah, but we realize that at some point in our lives, we would always, whether it's temporary or whether it's a lifelong um, impairment. So it's a nice thing for a designer to consider that in their design, and also educate their clients um, and concern their end users, and also seeing that it gives them more, it enhances the economic value, of your business. Yeah.
And I think, Ikam, I think one of the things that Ahmed noted in his presentation was how important it is that people understand this is not going to look like a rehab hospital, that this is about seamless integration of solutions. So aesthetics has got to be part of the conversation.
Very true. I agree absolutely, because sometimes it looks like when you just lift a ramp, for example, and just fixing the entrance of the building, it can be very annoying for many architects.
And badly designed, it diminishes the value of the building, and certainly
Yes,
diminishes the idea that this is doable and desirable.
Yes, it does. Okay. I think we'll call it a day. I'm very, very excited about this meeting. I'm very excited about resource persons, architect Ahmed, and Miss Valerie. We're very, very grateful to have you. Very insightful session, and I know people took something out of this. All right, we'll call it a day. And just in case you have questions, Valerie, I think some people asked for your slides.
Sure.
Somebody from South Africa asked for your slides.
Great. I'll send them right away, as soon as we hang up, as soon as we're finished.
All right. All right.
All
right. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much, Ahmed.
I want to match slides. Thank you. And happy International Day of Disabled People tomorrow.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.